You want to design a great user experience. What does that mean exactly? And how do you go about doing that? So the first thing I want to talk about are some basic user experience principles that I think are really important that help you design a great user experience. So the first one of these is that you've got to design for a particular target audience, for who they are, what they want to do, and their context of use. Now, of course, you might say, well, of course I'm going to do that. Well, that may not be as easy as you think. We have a tendency to, as designers, to make design decisions that make sense to us. We say, oh, I know. Here's what they'd want to see at this point. Here's the way the controls should be. Here's the information they would want to do. Here's the kind of game experience they want. But are you designing that for you, or do you really know that that's what's best for the target audience? And that you are not your target audience. If the target audience, let's say you're designing a camera, you're designing controls for a camera, and you're designing the controls that are on the small screen that's on the back of the camera, and maybe you're designing the software that comes with the camera. So are you designing for someone who's really used to using this kind of camera? Or are you designing for someone who's never used a camera like this before? Or maybe you're designing for a professional photographer. And so the type of audience that you're designing for will and should affect the design decisions you make. And that's a really important principle. Not only who they are and how they want to use it and what they want to do with it, but also the context of use. So are they someone, is this an amateur photographer who's out taking pictures once a month of their kid playing soccer? Or is this a professional photographer in the studio and they're using it in the studio, every day, hours a day? That will change some of the design decisions you make, the context of use as well. So when you're designing, you want to make sure that you are designing for a particular target audience and for the context of use. A second principle that's important is that when you're designing, you take into account the goals of the organization or the product owner, whoever's putting together this product. So I just said you should design for the target audience, and now I'm saying you should design for the goals of the organization, but you have to do both. And sometimes that's not easy. Let's take, for example, an app like Uber or Lyft, an app that where someone is calling for a car to come pick them up, arranging for a car to pick them up. Well, you want to design for the target audience. You want to make sure it's easy. They're probably on the street. They want to get a car. They want to get it quickly. It might be busy. There's a lot going on. But the company, the owner of this app, may say, well, okay, we want it to be easy, but we also want to build in like a surcharge if it's rush hour, or we want to encourage them to perhaps get a little bit nicer car. And you might say, well, that's going to make it more confusing. So I don't want to do that because I'm trying to design a good experience for the target audience. Well, you are trying to design a good experience for the target audience, but you also have to keep into your mind what the goals of the organization are. And that is, they sometimes don't mesh. So that can be a tricky thing for a UX person to do. Now, I realize that this might be a little bit controversial. And so one of the things I want you to know as we go through these principles, and actually as we go through this whole course, is that I'm giving you my opinion based on many years of experience of doing design, and not everyone may agree with me. So some of the stuff that I might say in the course is controversial, and please feel free to email me if you don't agree. But I think part of the role of the person who's designing a user experience is to meld the needs of the target audience, but also take into account the goals and business rules and anything else that the product owner is trying to build into the user experience as well. A third principle that's really important is to make the experience easy to use, easy to learn, that people won't have to think too much as they're using it. There's a great book by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think. And this is important. So it's not just taking into account the target audience and the goals of the organization, but doing so in a way that produces an experience that is easy to learn and easy to use. A fourth principle has to do with the experience being satisfying and pleasant. Well, isn't that the same as easy to use and easy to learn? Not necessarily. So sometimes when we're designing perhaps some software. Maybe you have someone who works at an insurance office and they're entering in insurance claims. And we definitely want that to be easy. We want to minimize the errors they're making. But sometimes we're designing something like a game or virtual reality or even an app, and we want it to not just be easy to use and learn, but we want it to be engaging and interesting. We want them to come back and use it again. And so easy to learn and use is a little bit different than pleasant, satisfying, and engaging. So, and sometimes those two things can be at odds with each other. And as a designer, you may have to figure out, are we going to lean towards one idea, easy versus satisfying at this particular point in this particular user experience? But it's one of the goals we have is to not just be easy to learn and use, but also to be pleasant, satisfying, and engaging. The last principle I want to mention is that the human experience is the most important piece of everything that we're talking about. So I said how it's important that we take the organization's goals into account, and we should. And we want to make sure we're using the technology to the best way, and we should. However, no matter what, the experience of the human should always come out on top. If you have to make a trade-off, you side on the human side, not on the technology side, not on the business side. So we don't want to forget ever when we're designing that we are designing the user experience, not just the product. And so even though I said all those other things are important, and they are, we always make sure the human is the most important. It's really easy on projects for there to be, just internal fights or disagreements about how to do something or what's most important. And if you are playing the role of user experience strategist or user experience designer on that project, that is your job to always be the voice of the human, the voice of the user, above everything else if there is a conflict. So those are our 5 principles of UX that I wanted to talk about and should always be guiding you as you go through designing a user experience. Now that we've covered some of the principles, let's talk in more detail about what as a user experience designer, or I'm also going to use the term strategist, and I'll explain what I mean, what the difference is between those two, and some of the other terms that you'll hear a lot if you are interested in looking at the field for a career, or if you're hiring user experience professionals. There's a lot of terms, and so we'll go into that as well. But I want to talk next about what are the kinds of things you need to know, and how do you go about getting that knowledge, and essentially, what does a UX person do? Like, what does it mean to design the user experience? So I like to talk about designing the user experience or strategizing the user experience as designing the intersection or the interface between the person, the user, the target audience, and the product or the thing that you're designing. So if you think about it, there's, let's think about an app that you're using on your mobile phone. So there's all the guts and the programming and the algorithms that are underneath that app that are making it work, all the code. And then there's what appears on the screen of someone's mobile phone. And then you have the user, the target audience person, the user who's using the app to do some task. In user experience design, we actually are not really all that interested in what's underneath. It's very important that someone's designing the algorithms and designing the code and writing the code and doing all of that stuff, but that's not what we're doing. We're concentrating on the part, the screen, the interaction, the conversation between the app and the person. And that's the part we're concentrating on. So that's the interface, and that's what the user experience designer or user experience strategist is focusing on. So I'm not saying the programming part is not important. It is, but it's not what the UX person is doing or working on. So if you're going to design that app or that software or that website or that game or that virtual reality scene or the way the robot interacts with the person, no matter what you're designing, if you're designing it, you're going to have to know, as we said, you got to know about the target audience. You have to know about who they are. You have to know about what their goals and intentions are, what they want to do. We talk about user stories or scenarios. So the most important and at a high level, what are they trying to do with this thing? And then you need to also know, we said, about the context of use. You're going to need to know what the stakeholders, what those product owners want. You're going to need to know about the technology. What will the technology allow you to do or not allow you to do? Are we talking about an app on a smartphone primarily? Are we talking about a desktop app that runs on a really big screen? Are we talking about a medical device that just has a very tiny screen? What is the technology like? What will it allow us to do? And what are the constraints of working with that particular technology? So there's some background work then that you need to do, some research, stakeholder research, target audience research, technology research that you're going to need to do in order to be able to do an effective design. Now we're going to talk in a little bit about some of the different types of ways that people do UX. We could call it UX methodology or UX process. And there are different schools of thought about, how much research you should be doing beforehand versus just diving in. So we'll get back to that. But there's a certain amount you're going to have to know, or you're not going to be able to design that screen or that control. What else are you doing if you're designing this interface, if you're designing the user experience? What else are you doing besides getting some background information? Well, you may be doing what I call high-level or conceptual model design, which means that instead of just sitting down and sketching out what screen number 1 is going to look like, what screen number 2 is going to look like, or I'm just going to sit down and sketch what the controls are. I'm going to sit down and sketch what the first screen looks like when someone starts to play the game. Instead of diving in to the details, I may want to do a high-level conceptual model. I may want to make some decisions about navigation and how information is going to be displayed, the information architecture, the organization of information, before I get down to some of the details. So we call that high-level design or conceptual model design, and that's something that a user experience designer and a user experience strategist would do. Now, in addition then to doing some high-level design, now we're getting down into what we might call detailed user interface design. And so now we're talking about, I'm on the screen and I'm ready to it's an application for, buying airplane tickets or making a banking deposit or whatever it is, and I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to, push that button and on that one screen and do this task. Well, what should be on the screen? How much information should be on? What should the button say? Where should the button be? What color should the button be? Right? There are a lot of detailed, or sometimes we call them micro decisions or micro moment decisions that need to be made in the interface for someone to be able to use the product. And both of these things, at the macro level, kind of a high level design, and at the micro moment level, are really, really important. And we really can't say that one is more important than the other in terms of designing something that has a great user experience. They are both important. Now, this is where we get into some of the controversies and some of the roles and what are things called and what who does what. I'm going to come back to that. I want to finish first, though, talking about all the different things that are involved in creating a good user experience. So we said there's some research we need to do so we understand the context, the technology, the user, the business goals. We said that there's some high-level design. We said that there's detailed design. There's also going to be, in that detailed design and even in the high-level design, we might be prototyping, we might be storyboarding, we're sketching, we're designing. We might be doing that with paper and pen. We might be doing that with a number of different prototyping tools. Now, this is not writing the final code. And in fact, some of your prototyping and sketching might not involve any code at all because you might just be doing it by literally on a whiteboard or with paper and pen. Or you might be using one of the many prototyping tools that are out there that are not the same as programming tools, but just allow you to put together quick sketches and designs and storyboards of what the experience is going to be like as the user does a particular task. And then there's going to be some amount of testing that you do of your designs. And in order to do a great user experience, you don't want to go do your design, have the whole thing programmed and coded, and then test. We talk in UX design about prototyping and testing and iterating and trying out and going through several cycles to make sure you've got the best design. And that's a really, really important part of the UX design process, is that you're able to come up with some design ideas, test them out, modify them, test them out again, and you have this iterative process. So that's kind of a high-level, quick look at the kinds of stuff that is involved in doing user experience design.